Cool. The moment both of you stop contacting each other, it feels quiet on the outside, but psychologically, it's anything but. Cool. What's really happening is not indifference, not closure, and definitely not strength. It's two nervous systems pulling back for very different reasons. You might be sitting with questions, replaying conversations, wondering if silence means you didn't matter. Meanwhile, a dismissive avoidant interprets this silence as safety at first, a relief from emotional pressure, but that relief is temporary. Cool. What looks like calm is actually emotional suppression kicking in. This mutual silence creates a pause where power shifts, attachment patterns reveal themselves. Cool. And unspoken emotions start moving underground. The longer the silence lasts, the more the avoidant mind begins to reconstruct what's missing, not immediately, but slowly. Cool. In fragments. This is why this phase is so confusing and so important. If you misunderstand it, you either break no contact too early or detach without healing. Stay with this moment, because what unfolds next explains everything about whether connection fades or quietly reshapes itself. Silence doesn't register as loneliness to a dismissive avoidant the way it does for most people. Their nervous system reads distance as control. Without messages, expectations, or emotional demands, their body finally relaxes. This is why they often seem unaffected, or even lighter at first. But that calm isn't emotional freedom. It's emotional shutdown. Instead of feeling the loss, they compartmentalize it. They distract themselves, stay busy, and convince themselves they're better off this way. What they're really doing is postponing emotion, not processing it. Over time, the absence you create starts to echo. Small reminders trigger unexpected reactions. They may think of you randomly, feel irritated without knowing why, or sense a strange emptiness they can't name. Silence removes pressure, but it also removes connection. And that contradiction slowly destabilizes their sense of emotional certainty. This delayed response is why avoidants often feel things when it's already too late. The reason they seem fine is because dismissive avoidants are experts at emotional self-containment. They've trained themselves to function without relying on anyone. So on the surface, nothing looks wrong. They keep routines, stay productive, and even appear relieved. But what you're seeing isn't emotional health. It's emotional minimization. Instead of allowing themselves to feel loss, they downgrade it. They tell themselves it wasn't that deep, that they didn't need the connection anyway. Underneath that calm exterior, their nervous system is still adjusting to the absence. Feelings don't disappear, they go quiet. And quiet emotions have a way of leaking out sideways, through irritability, restlessness, sudden boredom, or an unexplained urge to check in. They aren't fine, they're delayed. By the time emotion reaches their awareness, it arrives without warning, which is why their reactions often confuse everyone, including themselves. What you're witnessing is the slow emotional clock of a dismissive avoidant finally starting to move. Their feelings don't arrive in real time, because closeness was never safe for them growing up. When contact stops, their system doesn't grieve immediately, it stabilizes. Only after the pressure is gone do emotions begin to surface, piece by piece. A memory hits while they're busy. A song creates a pause they didn't expect. They start comparing new interactions to the connection they lost. This reaction is delayed because their mind protects them by keeping emotions at a distance until they feel in control again. But control doesn't equal closure. As time passes, curiosity replaces relief. They replay moments, wonder how you're doing, and feel a quiet pull they can't rationalize. This is why avoidants often reach emotional awareness long after the silence begins, when the absence finally feels permanent. No contact doesn't hurt a dismissive avoidant right away because their nervous system is wired to associate distance with safety. When communication stops, there's no immediate sense of loss, there's relief. No expectations, no emotional intensity, no pressure to show up in ways that once felt overwhelming. But that relief is temporary. As days pass, the brain can no longer blame stress or conflict for the quiet. The silence becomes real. That's when no contact starts to land. They notice the absence in subtle ways, fewer emotional anchors, fewer familiar moments, fewer places where you used to exist. Because they suppressed feelings earlier, those emotions now surface slowly and without structure. They don't experience heartbreak in a wave, they feel it in fragments. This delayed impact is why avoidants often start missing someone when the other person has already begun healing. No contact doesn't hit them late by accident. It hits when avoidance can no longer protect them. What a dismissive avoidant misses isn't always the obvious things like conversations or affection, it's the quiet emotional stability you brought into their world. Cool. When you disappear, they lose the background presence that made life feel regulated, even if they never acknowledged it. They miss being understood without having to explain themselves, the way you adjusted to their distance, the consistency they relied on but never credited. At first, they don't label this as loss. It shows up as irritation, restlessness, or a sense that something is off. They may try to replace the feeling with distractions or new connections, but the comparison keeps happening. What's gone isn't just you, it's the emotional mirror you provided. And once that absence becomes familiar, it creates a subtle ache. Not dramatic, not urgent, but persistent. That's when missing you turns into awareness, and awareness becomes regret. The question of whether avoidants come back after mutual silence doesn't have a simple yes or no. Silence removes pressure, and for a dismissive avoidant, pressure is what keeps emotions buried. When that pressure is gone, reflection has space to grow. Some avoidants do return, not because they suddenly become secure, but because the absence forces awareness. They begin to feel the emotional gap you left behind, and realize it wasn't as easy to replace as they thought. However, returning doesn't always mean readiness. Many come back cautiously, indirectly, or emotionally guarded, testing safety before closeness. Others don't return, not because they didn't care, but because confronting attachment wounds feels more threatening than loss. The real truth is this: silence doesn't guarantee a comeback, but it reveals reality. It shows whether connection mattered enough to challenge avoidance. And regardless of the outcome, mutual silence often brings clarity, either reconnection with growth or freedom without confusion. What quietly pushes a dismissive avoidant away isn't always drama, it's pressure disguised as care. Reaching out, just to check in, asking where things stand, or trying to clear the air can feel reasonable, but to them it signals loss of emotional freedom. Another mistake is waiting in silence while secretly hoping they'll notice and return. Avoidants sense unspoken expectations, and that invisible wait triggers withdrawal. Overanalyzing their behavior, reacting emotionally to delays, or shifting into self-abandonment to keep peace also backfires. It reinforces the belief that closeness leads to obligation. Even anger, when expressed impulsively, confirms their fear that connection equals conflict. What drives them further isn't your feelings, it's inconsistency and emotional chasing. The moment you center your worth on their response, the dynamic tilts. Stability, not strategy, is what prevents distance from becoming permanent. And silence stops being about them and starts becoming about you. When communication ends, you're forced to sit with emotions instead of chasing relief through contact. And that's where power quietly returns. You begin to notice how much energy was spent explaining, waiting, and shrinking yourself to keep connection alive. Silence teaches you that your worth doesn't come from being chosen in real time. It comes from choosing yourself consistently. Healing doesn't arrive as confidence at first. It arrives as clarity. You recognize patterns you ignored, boundaries you didn't protect, and needs you minimized. The absence creates space to regulate your own nervous system instead of reacting to someone else's distance. Over time, the urge to reach out fades. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped abandoning yourself. That's real power. Silence becomes less of a strategy and more of a reset. One that strengthens you whether they return or not.